His alarm sounds loudly. She barely reacts. She was already awake. The sound of waves crashing outside their window and wind swirling reminds her of a childhood memory, a day at the beach when she lost her beloved stuffed animal. The memory ends as soon as it begins. It was just an image of a little girl in a bathing suit crying next to a woman holding her hand. The smell of brine precedes the sun peeking through the open window of the tiny room. The smell comes through the screened window, down the bedroom wall, across the carpeted floor, and up the mattress lying on the floor, up the other wall and out the window back to the ocean. She is never up this early. She exhales he exhales as he lifts the blanket off his body and then lifts himself up to the edge of the bed, then turns off the alarm on the floor. The blanket folds over back towards her, and a breeze from the open window kisses her exposed thigh. He stands up and leaves the room quietly. She throws the cover over herself and slips underneath. The bed is cold without him. Her body follows a current of sheets moving towards the foot of the bed. She finds a spot still warm from where he was lying and rests her body in the space he left behind. She is listening to him getting dressed and then him moving his things down the hallway to the front door. She wonders if he noticed that she was awake. She feels the undertow of her sensitivities and hopes it will pass and lead back to sleep. Instead, she resurfaces to the edge of the blanket at the head of the bed to listen to him answer the ringing phone before he leaves. He raises the phone from the receiver and greets who must be a familiar voice on the other end of the line. Minutes pass quickly. She lays still except for the flutter of her eyes opening. She considers lifting the blanket and getting out of bed, but covered in blankets trumps starting the day. She rolls over on her back and stretches her arms over her head. It's too late now to try and find sleep. She moves her eyes back and forth between looking at the white ceiling and the open window above her head. Her hands rest next to her body, and she tries to hold her breath so that she doesn't move at all. She imagines lying in a coffin, still forever. Finally, her lungs force her to take a deep breath. She gasps for air loudly, and when she exhales, all the sound leaves out through the window where it came. She's struck by how apparent the silence is and how it makes her feel uncomfortable.
Wow. Special effects.
Yeah, it's emotion. Isn't it motion? Or
just a switch. She cups her hands over her ears to hear her heartbeat, but there's no sound. For a moment, there's total silence. No waves crashing, no birds chirping, no wind swirling. Motionless, she waits for something to happen. Then she sees him walk into the room. This is unexpected. She tries to remember something while their eyes catch each other. He pauses for a moment. She can't tell if he's surprised to see her awake, but she knows better than to ask him why he's returned so soon. She feels an unexplained empty space in her chest where her heart should be, and a bubble of air trapped in her throat. The room is still silent. Her eyelids close slowly. When she opens them again, he's closer to her. She watches him take in deep breaths as he looks at her, as he looks past her and searches for something to say, as if he might find the words behind her tucked in the space between her and the wall. She searches his face and notices his eyes filled with tears. It's unbearable to watch him struggle. In 2 years, she's never seen him overwhelmed by any emotion. Now she remembers the ringing phone, and her eyes fill with tears at this revelation. She was expecting this call, but had hoped the doctors would never make it. Before she can catch them, the words tremble off her tongue and fall to the floor. It's my mother, isn't it? She's dead. He nods his head yes and lifts the cover to lay in the bed next to her and grabs her just as the tears rush from her. Suddenly, all the sound rushes back into the room. The vacuum that had removed all the air sends it quickly back in. All the sounds, the ocean, the wind, their breathing, their heartbeats, it all rushes towards her and explodes against their bodies. She's overwhelmed by tears and convulses as she struggles not to breathe, but her body is unwilling to let her go and forces her to be present and take in air. He pulls her in closer. The moment drowns her, and she unravels in his arms. After a while, she's shipwrecked and sobbing and pauses. Her chest deflates into her body. She feels lifeless. Her eyes stay closed and buried in his chest. Everything seems unreal. She searches for something tangible to ground her, something real and far from this moment. Without any thought to what conjured the sensation, she presses up against him. She focuses on how warm he is. She touches his face and opens her mouth to kiss him. His lips are soft and his moist tongue touches her gently. Their hands meet and she puts his between her legs. She knows he can't resist if she's wet. Instinct overpowers logic. They're merely human now, with carnal desires. She rolls on her back and lets him climb on top and enter her. He holds himself up over her on his forearms and breathes heavy as he slowly pushes into her. She keeps her hands around his face and clenches her hips around him and pushes back into him. Her chest becomes warm and she hears her heart thumping. Her breathing is heavy and smooth. Lungs fill and empty like waves crashing on the shoreline and then running back to the sea. Her hands run down his back, the muscles stretch and contract. His back is warm and moist with sweat. She pulls him into her and rolls on top of him. She uses her hands to press against the mattress and slightly over his head. Her pelvis pushes harder into him. He lifts himself up and kisses her warm breast. The sensation makes her arch her back and drop her head back. Sea breeze passing through the window brushes her face and cools her flushed cheeks. He grabs her waist and pushes back into her. Nothing precedes this moment. Time escapes them, and they continue to follow the rhythm until they are both exhausted and satisfied. He wraps his arms around her. She lays her head on his chest with her legs tangled with his, panting and still. The breeze against their naked bodies cools them. She listens to the waves throw themselves against the rocky shoreline and charge up toward the sky to catch the wind swirling above them. She closes her eyes again and sees the little girl crying on the beach, but this time no one is holding her hand.